The first snow of December had just begun to fall when Ethan Miller reached the wooden steps of the mountain cabin. The wind was cold, the sky was gray, and the world felt like it was holding its breath. He had driven for hours from Seattle, hoping for a quiet weekend with no emails, no phone calls, and no reminders of the life that had grown too noisy. His head was tired, and his heart was even more tired. He had booked the cabin weeks ago, imagining peace, silence, and maybe the chance to breathe clearly again. But as he pulled the key from his pocket and reached for the door, he heard footsteps behind him, slow, uncertain, and familiar in a way that made him stiffen. When he turned around, he felt the shock hit him like a cold wave. Claire Donovan stood at the bottom of the steps, holding a navy suitcase and wearing a long winter coat dusted with snow. Her eyes widened the moment she recognized him, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her breath came out in small clouds, and for a few seconds, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other in the freezing wind, both caught in a moment they never planned for. "Ethan," she said softly, like the name had been asleep somewhere inside her. He swallowed, confused and thrown off. "Claire, what are you doing here?" She lifted her phone, her voice trembling. "I booked this cabin for the weekend." Ethan blinked and checked his email again, almost hoping he had made a mistake. Same dates, same cabin, same amount paid. He lifted the phone a little. "I booked it too." For a second, the world seemed to hold a strange silence. Snow fell harder, landing on their hair, their coats, their lashes. A small muscle in Claire's jaw tightened, and Ethan knew she was just as overwhelmed as he was. They had not seen each other in 6 months. They had ended things quietly, politely, telling themselves it was the mature decision, that life had pulled them in different directions. But the truth was heavier. They had loved each other deeply, and the breakup had hurt them more than either admitted. Now here, they were standing in front of the same cabin, with the same reservation on the same lonely December weekend. "This has to be some glitch," Claire murmured, her tone somewhere between disbelief and exhaustion. "Probably," Ethan answered, though a part of him wondered if life sometimes made strange choices on purpose. The cold was starting to bite into their hands, so Ethan unlocked the door and stepped aside. "Come inside. We'll figure it out." Claire hesitated. For a moment, it looked like she might turn around and leave. But something in her expression shifted, maybe tiredness, maybe curiosity, maybe something much older. She walked past him into the warm cabin. Inside, the space smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine wood. Soft lamps glowed against the wooden walls, and a small fireplace burned gently, filling the room with an orange light. The cabin was cozy, peaceful, exactly the kind of place people came to heal from life. Ethan set his bag down near the coat rack. Claire placed her suitcase by the couch, unsure of whether she should sit or stand or simply disappear. They both felt the awkwardness fill the space, like a thin fog between them. "I can leave," Ethan said after a moment, keeping his voice low. "You probably came here for some space." Claire looked at him quietly. "So did you." "Still," Ethan added, clearing his throat, "I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." Oh, she shook her head. "It's okay. I'm not running away from a cabin." She added after a small pause, "We can share it. Just for the weekend. It's big enough." He nodded, though the space between them wasn't really about distance. It was their past, their silence, their unfinished conversations. They moved around the cabin carefully, almost politely, giving each other space like strangers who remembered too much. Ethan unpacked his backpack by the window, while Claire unzipped her suitcase on the opposite side of the living room. The snow outside grew heavier, swirling in thick white waves. It felt like the world outside was getting farther away, leaving them inside a small bubble of old memories every so often. Ethan stole quick glances at Claire. How she tucked her hair behind her ear, how she pressed her lips together when she focused, how she tried to hide her nervousness. These small things had once been familiar to him, pieces of a life he had lost. Claire noticed him too. The way he still hummed when he was anxious, the way his shoulders tensed when he pretended he wasn't uncomfortable. The weekend they had both imagined as peaceful was already becoming something else, something complicated, emotional and strangely gentle after a while. Ethan made hot chocolate for both of them, mostly because he needed something to do with his hands. They sat across from each other at the small wooden table. The silence was soft, thick, and full of words they didn't know how to start. Claire breathed in deeply. "I didn't know you still came to the mountains." "Okay, only sometimes," Ethan replied. "Needed a break. Me too." Her voice cracked slightly on those two words. He noticed, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he let the quiet settle again, warm and slow like the air in the cabin. After a few moments, Claire spoke again, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. "Do you ever miss it?" Ethan looked up. "Miss what?" She lifted her gaze, her eyes steady, even though her voice wasn't. "Us." The question hit him in the chest. It wasn't too loud or too dramatic, it was simply honest. Ethan's throat tightened before he answered. Every day he finally said, "I didn't say it out loud, but I did." Claire blinked quickly, and he could tell she was fighting not to show emotion. The fire flickered behind her, lighting her face in a soft glow. She looked older, stronger, but still the same woman he had once imagined a future with. Ethan leaned back slightly, feeling the weight of the moment. He wanted to reach across the table, but he didn't. He wanted to ask her if she missed him too, but he didn't. He wanted to pretend he wasn't still affected by her presence, but he couldn't. Claire placed her mug down gently. "It's strange," she whispered. "I came here to forget everything for a moment, but the universe decided to hand me the one person I never really forgot." He gave a small laugh, the quiet kind that hurts more than it sounds. "Guess the universe has a weird sense of humor." Before Claire could respond, the lights overhead flickered. Once, twice, and then the entire cabin went dark. The sudden darkness made the room feel smaller, closer. The only light came from the fireplace, which cast slow, soft shadows on the walls. Claire inhaled sharply. "Did the power go out?" "Looks like it," Ethan said, standing up. "Probably the snowstorm." He took a step closer to her without thinking, just to reassure her. But the moment he reached out, his hand brushed hers in the dark. A small, accidental touch. But it sent warmth through him stronger than the fire. Claire didn't pull away. Her hands stayed there, still and soft, as if the darkness gave them permission to be honest without words. "Ethan," she whispered. "I'm right here," he murmured back. The fire crackled louder, and the room stayed dim, wrapped in quiet shadows. Their faces were only inches apart, but neither leaned in, neither stepped back. They just stood there. Two people caught between a past that hurt and a present they didn't expect. Outside, the storm grew stronger. Inside, the silence felt deeper, gentle, emotional, and heavier with meaning. Ethan felt the old memories stirring, not painful like before, but warm, almost peaceful. Claire's breathing softened. Her fingers curled slightly around his hand. Barely noticeable, but impossible to ignore. In that moment, the storm outside didn't matter. The darkness didn't matter. The confusion didn't matter. What mattered was that neither of them let go. And for the first time since they had parted ways months ago, something small and fragile and hopeful flickered between them quietly, softly, like a glow that refused to fade. The power didn't come back. The snow kept falling. The fire kept burning. And in the dim cabin, Ethan and Claire stood close, holding hands in a darkness that felt strangely like the beginning of something they had once lost. The fire in the cabin crackled gently, filling the space with warmth and light, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Outside, snow continued to fall in thick, soft layers, covering the world in white silence. Inside, Ethan and Claire sat closer than they had planned, sharing a blanket that smelled faintly of pine and wool. The cabin felt smaller, cozier, like it had drawn them together intentionally. Neither spoke at first. Words seemed too heavy for the fragile, charged space between them. But silence was never empty. It was full of everything they hadn't said over the months since their separation. Claire finally broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. "Funny, isn't it? I came here to forget everything for a while. And instead, I'm sitting with you. The one person I never really forgot." Ethan looked down at her, surprised by the honesty in her words. He saw the vulnerability he remembered, the openness he had once cherished, and it pulled at something deep inside him. "I didn't forget you either," he said softly. "I tried. I really tried. But I couldn't." Claire's gaze softened, and for a moment, the firelight made her look almost fragile. But there was strength too, the kind that comes from surviving heartbreak and learning to carry it quietly. "I thought I could move on," she said, "but every time I tried, it felt like a piece of me was missing. Like you were the piece I couldn't find anywhere else." Ethan's heart tightened. He knew that feeling all too well. He had spent months going through the motions, pretending to be okay while everything reminded him of her. He had walked past cafes they had loved, heard songs that made him think of her laugh, and yet tried to convince himself that it was over. But sitting here with her, watching her eyes glint with snowlight, he realized just how wrong he had been to believe he could forget her. He reached out slowly, almost instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It was a small gesture, respectful and gentle, but full of meaning. Claire didn't flinch. She let him, letting the warmth of his hand linger just long enough to feel connected. The fire's glow reflected in her eyes, making them shine like glass, catching the morning sun. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a mixture of fear and hope. "How we ended?" Ethan hesitated. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was heavy, layered, and tied to months of regret. He had replayed their last conversations 1,000 times, wondering where it went wrong. "I regret walking away before asking if you wanted me to stay," he admitted finally. "I regret thinking silence meant goodbye." Her lips parted, and she blinked back a small sheen of tears. It wasn't sadness exactly, it was relief, recognition, understanding. "It never meant goodbye," she whispered. The words hung between them, fragile and trembling, like frost on a window pane waiting to melt outside. The wind howled against the cabin, rattling the wooden beams gently. But inside, the storm felt distant. Time seemed to stretch, slow down, as if the world outside had stopped entirely to give them this moment. Ethan shifted slightly, careful not to crowd her, yet wanting to close the distance just enough to feel her presence fully. Claire mirrored him, leaning in just slightly. A gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed, except for the way their shoulders brushed ever so lightly. It was electric without being dramatic, quiet yet powerful. A gentle acknowledgement that, despite the months apart, the bond between them remained unbroken. They talked for hours without realizing it, their voices low, confiding, and intimate in a way that had nothing to do with romance in a physical sense, but everything to do with closeness of the heart. They spoke about the little things books they were reading, movies they wanted to see, memories of trips together, small jokes they had shared. But beneath the surface, each word carried a deeper meaning, a recognition of what they had lost and what they still hoped to find again. Claire laughed quietly at one of Ethan's stories, a sound he realized he had missed more than he had admitted to himself. Ethan's chest tightened at the sound, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners, the way her hand brushed against the mug she was holding. The cabin, the fire, the snow, and the storm outside all faded into the background. All that existed was this room, this moment, this fragile reconnection between two hearts that had wandered apart and found their way back at one point. Claire looked out the window at the falling snow, her breath fogging the glass. "It's so peaceful," she murmured, like the world stopped for a little while. Ethan watched her, studying the curve of her jaw, the slope of her shoulders, the gentle way she shifted under the blanket. He realized he had memorized these little details without even thinking, and it made him ache for the months when he had been without her. "I think," he said slowly, "we've been running from each other and from ourselves for too long. Maybe we just needed a place like this, and a reason to stop running." Claire's hand found his again, this time intentionally. She laced her fingers with his, feeling the warmth of him, the reassurance, the unspoken promise that whatever they had lost could be found again if they tried. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared that if we start again, we might get hurt." Ethan squeezed her hand lightly, letting her know he understood without needing to say much more. "We might," he said honestly, "but I'd rather try with you than keep wondering what could have been." Her lips curved into a small, hopeful smile, the kind that made him realize the weight of months apart had finally lifted, even if just a little. They didn't need grand gestures or sweeping promises. In the quiet cabin, in the soft flicker of firelight, their presence was enough. Connection was enough. Understanding was enough. They were beginning to rebuild, slowly, piece by piece, with nothing forced, nothing rushed. Nothing inappropriate, just a hearts finding each other in a moment that felt entirely their own. Outside, the storm eased slightly, snow falling in softer layers now, covering the ground in quiet white. Inside, Ethan and Claire leaned back into the couch, still under the blanket, still holding hands, still talking and laughing quietly. The fire crackled and popped, sending small sparks that danced briefly before fading, like little reminders of the fragility and beauty of life itself. Every glance, every touch, every shared memory added layers to the warmth growing between them. It wasn't a sudden, intense romance. It was something steadier, something real, something that could survive time and mistakes. It was the kind of love that didn't need dramatic confessions or physical gestures to exist. It was felt deeply in quiet, moments and shared silences. At one point, Ethan reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Claire's ear again, more gently than before. Her hand lingered against his arm, a subtle acknowledgement of trust, comfort, and maybe a quiet longing that neither of them fully admitted. They talked about their work, their friends, their families, and their dreams, but always, beneath it all, was the unspoken layer of their past love, the bond that had never truly disappeared. Hours passed like minutes. Outside, the world remained blanketed in snow, quiet and untouched. Inside, the cabin felt like its own small universe, a place removed from everything else, where the past could be reconciled with the present and maybe, eventually, the future. Ethan and Claire spoke less now, just enjoying the simple closeness of being near each other, the warmth of the fire, and the security of knowing that they had found a way back to one another, at least for now. Claire rested her head lightly against Ethan's shoulder, careful not to intrude but seeking the reassurance his presence offered. Ethan rested his cheek against her hair, feeling a calm he hadn't experienced in months. They didn't need to speak. Words were unnecessary. The room was full of understanding, forgiveness, hope, and gentle affection. Every second they spent like this built a bridge over the months of silence, mistakes, and separation. It was not dramatic. It was not forced. It was real, tender, and lasting. Finally, Claire whispered, almost shyly, "I don't want to leave." Ethan smiled softly, a mixture of relief and hope filling his chest. "Then stay," he said. "We can stay, talk, rebuild, try again. Whatever we need to do, we do it together." Snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in quiet white. The fire flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls and the two figures on the couch. And in that warm, small cabin, Ethan and Claire finally understood something important. The world outside could wait. The storm could rage. The past could linger. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. They stayed close through the night, talking, laughing quietly, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. No drama, no rush, no pressure, just two hearts rediscovering one another. The cabin became a haven, a place of reconciliation, hope, and quiet intimacy. They were not the same people who had walked in 6 months ago. They were wiser, softer, and more patient. And though they didn't know what the future would hold, they knew that. For this moment, they didn't need to leave. And so the weekend stretched on, slow, peaceful, and full of possibilities. Ethan and Claire remained in the cabin, not because the snow trapped them, not because fate demanded it, but because their hearts told them they belonged together again. In the gentle warmth of the fire, surrounded by winter's quiet beauty, they began to write a new chapter, one built on honesty, care, and the understanding that love sometimes needed time to find its way.